Hello, and welcome to the Michele Brangwen Dance Ensemble's first ever YouTube live stream. I'm Michele Brangwen, and this is our music director, Tim Hagans.
Hello, hello.
We really appreciate you joining us this evening. We're going to introduce our new dance and music film, Orchid People, and then we'll show you the film, and then we'll come back on camera and I'm going to call up your comments from the Say Something area of the live stream. If you don't see that, if you click expand, that area will come up to the right of the YouTube image, and we'll try to respond at that time to as many comments, questions, waves as possible during that time. So before I show you the film and introduce Orchid People, I just want to give you a brief word about the Michele Brangwen Dance Ensemble, just in case you aren't familiar with our work. We are an interdisciplinary performing arts ensemble of contemporary dance and music. In 20 years, every performance has included live original music and the musicians as integral parts of the visual stage imagery. So that's us. This is our 20th anniversary season. And of course, like many of our colleagues and artists across the world, really, everything we had scheduled live was canceled. So I'm really happy to say that the 7 artists performing in this film were all scheduled to do performances with us in New York City and Houston. So we all stayed together and worked digitally, which I'm incredibly grateful for. We have an 8th artist that would have been joining us this season, Danielle Reich. She's a wonderful composer and vocalist, and I'm happy to say that we are working on a new film to her music with her vocals, beautiful voice, that we're going to premiere in December in honor of the winter solstice. So we have some more programming coming up for you. So Orchid People, none of myself or my dancers have a home studio, so we have a very small space to work in. So I wanted to design a new piece that we could rehearse together safely over Zoom. In New York, all the rehearsal spaces are still, most of them are closed. So I had this idea about exploring the strength and the power in really fragile and delicate things. Flowers, leaves, people who are aging, sweetness. There are all these really delicate things in the world that we think of as fragile, but in reality they're very strong and powerful, the impression that they give us. So I had this idea of orchids, and I really did want to make it fun because this is a really difficult time. So I was thinking, what if orchids were superheroes? What would that be like? So that was really my premise in doing the piece. I wanted it to be fun. I wanted it to explore those themes. The central theme, the central section of the work is called Midnight Orchid. It's in 3 short sections, and I had been thinking a lot about an orchid that I had a long time ago. It was in my bathroom, and it had new buds that came out, and the buds were up for, it was longer than 6 months. I mean, it was months and months and months, and they were kind of fat, swollen buds, but they just stayed that way for so long. And I thought, well, they're just going to fall off. There's no way that anything could take that long to bloom. And then one day I walked into the bathroom and these buds had opened and they were just stunning. And so I think that's a really good metaphor for where we are right now. We're closed and we're still closed, but we will open again. And there are forces and things going on inside in the closed time. And I think there's, if you look at an orchid, it just shows you that there's this beauty and integrity in patience. So I just thought that was a kind of a nice metaphor to explore during this time. Going back to the concept, if you only have 6 feet by 6 feet to work, I thought, well, let's try to make it really bouncy and energetic, and let's see how wild we can get in this small little space. So I contacted the drummer, Anders Mogensen, who was scheduled to come over. He lives in Odense, Denmark. He was scheduled to come over for performances this year with us. And I asked him to write some drum compositions that were like really energetic and bouncy. And I told him this idea of like, what if the orchid was a superhero? And so he sent me this quite a few files, and one of them was so fantastic that I decided, why don't we just make that the opening section, drums and dancers, because we'd actually never done that before. And then there was another drum composition that Tim said, I think Thomas Helton, who's our bass player, amazing composer, could write a really beautiful bass part for this, and then I could write a trumpet part over it. So we sent that drum composition to Thomas, and he wrote the most beautiful bass part. And both Tim and I came to the decision simultaneously, because it was just so beautiful. We wanted that to cycle all the way through bass and drums before we added trumpet, just to hear what he had written was so beautiful just with the drums. So that goes through once, and then the trumpet comes in afterwards. So we had two movements, and I really wanted to end on something light and happy and bouncy and to make you smile. So I asked, what about a funk groove? So Anders wrote a great drum funk composition, and Thomas wrote a great bass line over that, and then Tim wrote some great melodies. So we had a rehearsal draft, and then when the musicians recorded their parts, so it went round again. So then everything went back to Anders, so that when he recorded his compositions on camera, he could also respond to what Thomas and Tim had done, and then it went around again. So even though we couldn't be all together, the musicians worked together on that. So it was really great. Thomas Helton has been with us since 2003, and Tim since 2007. So we all have a long history of working together and building things. So I was really excited that we could build this digitally. The last thing I want to say before I show you the film is that I really want to thank so much my dancers, Robin Gilbert, Euritzi Govea, and Christian Laverty Koenig. They were amazing. It was the highlight of my week to see them, their smiling faces on Zoom. It cannot be easy to learn complicated contemporary choreography flattened out on a computer screen. We never count eights. We use modern music, and on the few times that we do count eights, you can't hear them. So it's not easy, and they were just smiling and enthusiastic and so beautiful, such beautiful artists, and so poetic, that I'm really grateful to them, and I just want to thank them before I show you this film. They're amazing. So I'm going to show you Orchid People. I hope you like it, and then we'll come back and respond to your comments. Okay, so here's Orchid People.
Here we go.
Half note equals 88
two, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, we're back. Before I call up your comments on YouTube, I just want to say that if you are craving a more in-depth discussion about the creative process, and you'd like to ask questions on camera, or maybe talk a little bit about what you're planning to create yourself. Next week at the same time, we're going to hold a Zoom meeting that we will also stream through YouTube. So if you're interested in the conversation but you don't really want to attend, you can watch it on YouTube. Or you can register for the Zoom meeting by just sending an email to info@brangwendance.org and put Zoom in the subject line, and just tell us your name and an affiliation if you have one. You can be an audience member, you can be an artist, you can be someone who wants to start to create. So we're just wanted to experiment with this way to sort of talk about different nuts and bolts about how we created this, and just kind of have a discussion about ways to create during this time. So this is our first digital season, so we're experimenting with different kinds of programming. So if you'd like to join us, it's info@brangwendance.org, Zoom in the subject matter, and just give us your name and email and we'll send you a Zoom link. Or if you're interested but you don't want to be in the meeting, tune in next week on YouTube, and we'll be streaming that through YouTube. So I'm going to call up your comments here on my screen. Belinda Cooper, oh, thank you so much. Herb says, I did not realize how much I missed this. Yes, thank you. That's a wonderful thing to say, and we feel the same way. Being able to dance out on the roof was incredible after being in such a confined space for so long. So I think we're all missing those things. So this is why we're trying to create this digital content in the meantime. So beautiful. Thank you so much for that comment. I don't see any questions, so I actually have a question for Tim Hagans. As you may know, Tim Hagans has been nominated for Grammys 3 times, and he recorded for Blue Note. Now he's with his own label, Waiting Moon Records, but he's known as a jazz trumpeter. But boy, you really know what to do with a funk groove. You're really at home. So I just wondered if you could talk about that.
Sure. Funk is one of my favorite subjects. And, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and started playing trumpet in the mid-'60s. And one of my first trumpet inspirations was a guy by the name of Marvin Pierce, who played with the Ohio Players. We were in high school together, and then when the Ohio Players really hit it big, Marvin was the trumpet player, trombone player. So there is a funk history in Southern Ohio. James Brown recorded at a studio in Cincinnati, many records, and so I grew up, hearing kind of like local guys playing funk, and what really hit me the hardest was listening to Freddie Hubbard's records on CTI records. I'm talking about Red Clay, Straight Life. Now, one of my favorite records, and I can't think of
First
it.
Light.
First Light. And the way Freddie played over funk grooves that drummers on his records, Billy Cobham, Tony Williams, Jack DeJohnette, what they were laying down was just, I thought was incredible. And before there were play-along records to learn how to improvise, I was playing along with Freddie's records during the guitar and the piano solos, listening to Freddie, of course, during his solos. And so I've always been very enamored with that kind of feel. And of course, the Electric Miles bands from the late 60s to 1975, when he temporarily retired for a few years, listening to those records and playing along with Jack Johnson, Agartha, Black Beauty, those records, also had a lot of bashing and crashing funk. So for me, it's always been, as well as, of course, as the jazz swing feel and Latin grooves, funk has always been kind of an audible rhythmic place where I could play some really weird lines and leave some space for the rhythm section to fill in, and then come back in with an answer to perhaps the line I had just played before the little drum fills. And so when I heard Anders play this funk groove, I immediately started hearing melodies, and especially when Thomas Helton put his bass line on, then it just kind of flowed. And I have to admit, some of those melody lines on the third movement of this piece were directly inspired by Freddie Hubbard.
You know, it's funny you mentioned Miles Davis, because when we first had the shelter at home order, I remember one of the first LPs that I put on was Miles Davis' Star People,
right?
Which is a beautiful recording, and it has his drawings on the cover of dancers, and with really vivid colors. So it was just it was inspiring.
Right.
Star People, Orchid People. So I'm looking here, Jen. Oh, thank you. Beautiful dancer, and also a teacher at Adelphi University. Lovely work. Congratulations. Thank you, Jen, for the good words and for tuning in. Herb says, you usually have a cinematographer. How was it doing the camera work yourselves? That's a great question. I mean, I have been shooting my work and editing my work for the past 10 years. I mean, for about 15 years, for 10 straight years, I collaborated with a good friend of mine who's an amazing filmmaker, Junwin Perez Verti. She's from Mexico City, and we have done a lot of projects together, and we have edited a lot together. And I really feel like I studied editing with her, because she was so brave, and it seemed like she could make anything work. Like, I would think there's no way that you can edit these two sections together. We're going to have to choose another take, and she would just go in there and make it happen. And she made me be like really, courageous. So for 10 years, I worked with her, and then I took some online classes in digital editing. So I feel like I've been working editing for 20 years. And I also started shooting my own work throughout the past 10 years. So I've had a lot of experience behind the camera. But it is a lot of pressure, because these dancers are so beautiful and they're so joyous, and so you just really want to capture that on the camera. So you really have to do handheld. I mean, for me, that's my personal taste, that to shoot dance handheld. And so you have to be really steady and move slowly. And sometimes, you trip or you have a sudden movement, and it can be difficult. And then Tim Hagans shot me, so he had to learn,
Wait a minute, I filmed you.
You filmed me,
Yes.
right? You filmed me. He had to learn to not, he thought we could just put it on a tripod and then it flattens the dance out. So we did quite a few sessions actually with him and the camera, figuring out how to shoot, and he wanted to learn, and he really did. So he was great. So that's a great question. I would have loved to have Junwin shooting, or my brother's a filmmaker, Peter Joseph. He's amazing. But it just wasn't possible given the circumstances. So it was us as the film crew. I think there's some other comments here. The audio sounded, Richard Power says the audio sounded great and well mixed. Were there any challenges in putting that all together a long distance? I think, let's see. Were there challenges putting it together a long distance? It's a good question. I can tell you.
You can
I
go
can
ahead
tell you.
before I think of 5 things at once.
Right.
And I can't figure out which one to
Good.
say first.
The rehearsal draft that we started in with was drums recorded on a cell phone. And one of the things is that if you try to play a drum track through Zoom or through a lot of these digital medias, the distortion is incredible. So, that was the difficulty sending it to my dancer, trying to play it over Zoom. So sometimes we would just like all do 1, 2, 3, boom, and we'd start the music with all of us in our different places. And when we mixed the file that was just drums, then it was easier for rehearsal, yeah, that was one thing, a pragmatic thing about that. And then, of course, what else?
Well, if I can just relate how the whole thing went together. Once, we had the cell phone files from Anders with the drums, but it was distorted. And I believe we sent those files to Thomas Helton, and he composed the bass lines. But we asked Anders to go into a real recording studio where he lives in Odense, Denmark, to re-record what he had recorded before on his cell phone, with specific things to make sure that he replicated what he did the first time. And so as you noticed on the credits, there was a recording engineer, Peter Hellese, and he did a great job with 4 microphones on the drum set, and then sent the rough mix to me so that I could adjust it a little bit if we needed a little more cymbal crashes in certain spots or a little less snare drum in certain spots, because the dancers had gotten used to the first cell phone file. So we were trying to replicate that. And so once we got that to the point where it replicated the original file, then Thomas sent me his bass part that he recorded with the new drum file, and I mixed that and EQ'd that. And it's amazing how Thomas recorded. I had to do very little EQing or sound adjustments. It sounded great. And I'm not sure how he recorded that on his iPad.
He has the same microphone that we're using right now for this. It's an AKG condenser mic. For it can plug into a computer or a portable device, but it's a really great microphone. I always stalk Thomas Helton for his equipment, and he's done some online interviews, and I was like, what are you using, because you sound so good? And he goes, well, I'm using this AKG. I use it for the bass. I use it for and that's what we're going to talk about too next week on that Zoom, is like, okay, well, I want to do this, I want to do that, like, let's talk about what do you need, what could you if people are interested in those kinds of things. And
so
sorry.
Well, I added the trumpet part after I had mixed the bass and the drums in, and I like the trumpet to have a lot of reverb. Obviously, the trumpet wasn't recorded on the rooftop because there's a lot of noise from the ventilators on rooftops and the city traffic, and so I recorded in our recording studio here, which also doubles as the dance studio, and I added a lot of reverb because I like a real dark, reverby sound. And so it may seem a little strange to have that much reverb and that kind of trumpet sound looking at somebody playing on a rooftop in a big city, but I thought it worked, and so I just got the raw mix of the drums, Thomas, added myself, and then mixed everything together. And 3 completely different sound qualities, attacks, timbres, and so it was very easy to match everything, because actually everything is so different: drums, bass, and trumpet.
Right, and Ronaldo Ochoa, a good friend of mine, wonderful composer, also was really helpful, because we did get a mix from Denmark, and I wanted to adjust it to not to have a little bit more of the balance that I had been used to hearing. so we took it in. So it was actually mixed in Denmark, and then we did a little remixing here. So, and I will say, he said he uses the word studio, but basically we live in a very small apartment. So the living room, living area is the dance studio, is the recording studio, is the everything takes place in this one room. So and Herb says, "I'm sorry, I did not realize you were doing your own filming for so long." Oh, it's totally cool. When I can, over the past 10 years, I have had June Win or Peter Joseph film whenever I can. Sometimes when I'm doing a dance on camera project, I've actually made a rough cut with a camera, and then I show that to the camera woman or man that I'm using, and show them what I want and that kind of thing. But in this case, I really we were rehearsing in the peak of the pandemic, and so we stayed safe on Zoom, and so the first time I was out there filming was actually on the roof. But if you go through Artcast, there are quite a few things that have me as a camera person, but if you weren't looking at the credits carefully, you wouldn't know that. So but no problems. That was actually a great question.
Right.
So I also think when you love something, you can learn how to film it. So it takes time, but I think if you have a passion for something, you can learn the best way to frame it. And for other choreographers, I would say too, what you see in your mind's eye, so you really do have an idea what will look good if you start filming your own work. You'll start to get a sense for and get bolder, and I think it is. So in other words, I think filming can also be connected to choreographing and painting and costuming. I think they're kind of all related to this idea of what you see, and the shapes and the colors that you see. I have here, it says did you do the choreography with the rooftop background in mind? It seems so much a part of the performance. No, I actually didn't talk about it earlier. When we first started doing this, I knew that I wanted to have an outdoor location. And actually, we weren't sure. One of my dancers, we thought actually might be out of the country, so he was going to self-film where he was, and it turned out that the borders closed, so he wanted to visit someone that needed some care. So one of the things that I did when I started this was to just kind of be flexible. And also kind of choreographed. Sometimes I would do the work. I have a little dance floor that I lay down, but I would do the work on choreography to see if we were on dirt or we were on concrete. So originally it was, I was just trying to figure out some sort of outdoor location. And then the film was I think it was pretty much started or midway through, when we finally, or towards the end, when we finally got the rooftop location. And I saw those water towers, and they are, perfect for the symbolism of the water and the orchid. But in the very final one, I did know that we were going to have that skyline of New York behind us. So the ending part really was responding to the fact that we had this great space to film. But the beginning part was kind of an open thing, not really certain where we were going to film, but just tearing into it and starting and hoping for the best. And so we really got this magical location, which we're actually going to use again for the next one in December. So I have
that's
a great question. Oh, you have a question, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
The opening credits. very interesting and very unusual. And so I think it's interesting to find out about
the opening credits.
where
Well,
that came from.
There's a Steve McQueen movie called Bullet. I think it's from 1970, is it? 72?
68,
68 or something. It's and it's got this really hip music, and there's these credits that appear, and they get bigger and bigger, and as they get bigger you see that the next scene is actually taking place in the credits, so it would have like directed by or music or something, and things are going on in the credits, and it gets bigger and bigger. It's just the hippest, coolest thing ever, and ever since I've seen that, I thought, I want to use that somehow. I want to figure out how to do that first of all, and I want to be able to use that. So this was the perfect opportunity with this idea of superhero. So like to have the name get bigger. So that it's Pablo Ferro did the Steve McQueen Bullet credits. They're really cool. And I must say, when you watch television and movies from like the 60s and the 70s, they really were experimenting with these fun kinds of effects with split screen, with multiple screen, with image in image, with and a lot of television and movies that you see today have this kind of like reality kind of thing where they give you a lot of cuts and they're trying to show you something like you're in the room. But I think those older techniques are much more powerful. An exception would be James Franco did a film of an adaptation of William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, and he used a split screen throughout the whole movie. Really interesting. But anyway, I'm in love with those old techniques, and I love to I love to experiment them. And if you ever if you Google on YouTube opening credits to Bullet, Bullit, because it's the name of a character. It's not like a bullet from a gun, but it's a character's name. It's a great Steve McQueen movie. It has the first ever car chase in it in San Francisco. But you can just Google and just get the opening credits, and they're like really super hip and cool. So that's a good question.
Yeah,
Thanks
that's a good answer.
Thanks for asking. Well, really, this is so meaningful for us, and we welcome your feedback, your comments. Feel free to email us, Michele@brangwendance.org. If you'd like to, have a more face-to-face discussion about creating during this time, join us for the Zoom meeting. It will be live streamed, so it's not a private Zoom meeting, but it's not going to be kept up on YouTube. So, if you'd like to join us for that meeting, that should be fun. Anders will be joining us from Denmark, and I think Thomas from Houston, and we'll be here, and some the dancers. I think Euritzi is going to join us. So I think, and Robin, if her gig gets canceled, she's
she's a great drummer.
She's a great drummer, and she actually has a gig that night, an outdoor gig. So we'll see. But if her gig gets canceled with the weather, she'll be with us. So it should be fun. If you're interested, once again, info@brangwendance.org. Put Zoom in the subject line and your name, and or if you if you're following the dance company on Facebook, you can send me a message through Facebook with your email, and we'll send you a link prior to the broadcast. So anyway, thank you everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much for your comments. It really means a lot. This is a really strange time for everyone, and so we're just trying to find ways to just connect to each other as best as we can, and as much as we can. So it's really meaningful that you tuned in for this. So, and we hope to see you again on future live streams. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thanks for being there.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.